Hello, what's going on everybody? This is Howard, music supervisor here at AIVA, and today I'd like to show you how to quickly make your own personalized, unique composition using our brand new awesome feature that we just developed here at AIVA called Generation Profiles. Let's get into it. So what is different about Generation Profile from other existing features for creating music in AIVA is that you now get to create your own music generation models, and by that I mean you get to define your own unique personalized style that AIVA can create compositions based on. I want to walk you through how I go about creating a generation profile from scratch. But before we start, one question that we want to ask ourselves first is what do we want our musical style to sound like, right? Do you like your music very loud and upbeat, or slow and quiet, or maybe even upbeat and quiet? You know, you can mix and match any of these qualities all you want with generation profiles. But right now, I like to start with one of my favorite genres of all time, drum and bass. And specifically the more ambient one that is also called liquid drum and bass. So let's get into it. The first step I would recommend that we do, and this is a very useful tip, is to find a reference track in the style that we're going for. And having this reference track will really help us hone in on the musical direction that we want for our generation profile. So here I actually have a liquid drum and bass piece ready to be played. So let's take a listen and identify some of the key musical elements that make this liquid drum and bass piece, well, liquid drum and bass-ish. Alright, so let's break down this specific instrumentation and then talk about the production strategies that we want to use for creating this generation profile. So let's look at the instrumentation. Let's look at all these different instruments. So we have the synthesizer pad playing in the foreground, and it's kind of blending in with the really atmospheric sounding piano. And for the bass, it's very minimal, it's very subtle almost. It sounds like a sine wave, like it's really subby, like it doesn't really feature a lot of higher frequency contents like the ones you will hear in, let's say, like an acoustic bass. Then of course it has to feature the classic aim and break style percussion, because that's a must-have in any kind of drum and bass music. And then we also have a voice pad playing in the background, like you can hear, like it's very subtle, kind of choir-ish vocal pad. And then as we approach the end of the song, we can also hear this really sparse, chopped sample vocal, and then it's kind of serving as this kind of ornamental kind of embellishment on top of the other layers of instruments. So to recap, we have the synthesizer pad, we have the atmospheric piano, we have the sub bass, and then we have the classic aim and break style drum, the voice pad, and then the sampled vocals playing at the end of the phrase as some kind of embellishment. So let's talk about the production strategy now. What do we find here? Like there's a lot of reverb, obviously. So there's this kind of large, out of this world, kind of really washy, ethereal kind of reverb. And then there's also some light delay on higher frequency contents like the pad and the keys, just to kind of make it more spacious, you know, because I think like the essence of this kind of subgenre is the space. It's really heavy on the reverb. I think like the keyword here is atmospheric and ambient. Alright, so now we're in the app, and then let's get started on creating a generation profile. So now we're in the generation profiles tab on the AIVA app. So let's just go to the top right corner and click create, and then go to generation profile. So the first window that's going to pop up is to have you select a mood that you want to use as a template for a generation profile. So for me, because like I want to listen to some liquid drum based music when I'm chilling on the sofa, it's not like something I want to listen to when I want to punch someone or cry on the sofa. So emotion wise, I definitely think this falls into the calm category. And of course we're dealing with generation profile here, so it's completely up to you. For example, like that liquid drum and bass music that reminds you of your ex, then sure, go for it. But in this case, I want to go for calm. So let's get that. Alright, so now the app will prompt you into this page with a lot of different parameters to tweak. So since we're dealing with drum and bass, what we can do first is to focus on the drum, specifically the aim and break style drums. So let's add a new layer. In this case, we'll select percussion and confirm selection. So the next step will be adding a accompaniment pack. And by that, I mean different rhythmic patterns that you can choose for your percussions. We have the drum and bass percussion accompaniment pack. That's exactly what we need here, so let's pick that. And then we had to add an instrument. We need to add a drum kit to play the rhythmic pattern that we just picked, right? The accompaniment pack that we just picked. So let's select a instrument for the drums. And all right, we have ambient, big room, cyberpunk, drum and bass. All right, that's what we want. And then we have 4 different kits. So let's select all of them. And bass 1, 2, 4. Added. In case you're not sure what the drum kit that you just selected sounds like, you can always click the preview button here to kind of take a listen to what your selection sounds like. Nice. All right, so now we get the percussion down. So since we're dealing with drum and bass, let's deal with the bass. If we go back and listen to our reference track, you will notice that the bass is mostly sustained non-stop note. Actually, the default accompaniment pack for the bass layer, which is the simple sustained bass pack, is exactly what we need here. So nice. But the instrument here, the pop piano, is not what we want, because remember what we're saying about the kind of bass that we want to go for is something that is very subby, something that is very sine wave-ish, something very minimal and subtle. So let's definitely switch the instrument here. Boom, I don't want that. And then because it's a sine wave, right? So it's definitely gonna be made by a synthesizer. So we go to the synthesizer tab and then go to the bass, and then there we go, boom, bass 1, sine. And here's some patch types that represent different types of articulation that we can pick for our sine bass. I don't want staccato, which means short separated notes. What I want is legato, which stands for notes that are long, smooth, and connected. But for this particular instrument, we don't have that. So let's pick sustain, which serves more or less similar purposes. But what I'll recommend is that when you're making your own generation profile and you want your instrument to play sustained notes, always use legato over sustain whenever legato is available for better performance. And then here I want to share with you a very fun feature that we had. It's called doubling instruments, and as the name suggests, you can have one instrument and then another instrument combined together, so you can make more interesting sounds out of the 2 instruments of your choice. So let's do something fun with the bass. We definitely want to go for something sine wave-ish. We can either use the one already created by AIVA, so we have a bunch of options. This is like shopping for Christmas, basically. It's like you have so many options here, but you can also make your own doubling instruments by clicking my doubling instruments here and then go here and add. There are some other instruments that I already made, but I'm gonna show you guys how to make it from scratch here. Definitely want the sine wave bass in there. So there we go, sustain. And then the fun thing you can do with doubling instrument, is a cool feature to have, is that you can actually set the octave in the doubling instrument. So you can set one of the instruments to be always playing an octave up or an octave down. Very easy, very simple. And then let's add another synth bass in there, but I don't know what I really want here. But oh, there we go, there's another sine pulse, which might be interesting, since the percussiveness of staccato combined with the sustained note might create a sharper attack or a sharper beginning of the note, which will give the long sustained bass a more percussive texture. So let's play around with that. And then what should we name them? Let's do liquid drum and bass crazy sine on all cap. All right, create. All right, there we go. And then you can, of course, click the preview button to hear what it sounds like before you decide to go with it. All right, it might work. All right, let's do it. All right, now we already add the instrument in there, and boom, there we go. There's the bass pack. Of course, if you want to add more variation to the rhythmic pattern for the bass, of course, go for it. But I want to stick to the musical intention here. I want the bass to be more sustained than more rhythmic in a way. All right, so let's move on from the bass layer and let's go to the chords layer. Okay, so let's think about this. So what are the instruments that are playing the chords in the reference track? That will be the synth pad, the piano, and then the vocal pad, right? What we can do is we can take one of the instruments from the synth pad, the piano, and the vocal pad and put one of them into the chords layer, and then put the rest of them into what we call the extra layers. And I will explain the reason why we're doing this later, but let's put the synthesizer pad into the chords layer first. The default accompanying pack for the chords layer is the fully sustained triads, and that actually serves our purpose too, because we want something that is sustaining, that is exactly what we want. And again, like the bass, we want to switch out the instrument, so let's definitely remove that. Boom. What we want to do here is go to synthesizers and then pick a pad, and then okay, there is a sine pad there, and that's definitely do airy, because it's gonna sound spacey, right? So let's do that, and we can add one more just to give it more variation, make it more diverse. Add the space pad in there, so boom. And then you can also play around with doubling instruments here, and you can create your own. So whichever two pads you feel like work together really well, then you can add doubling instruments there. For the chords, even though it's all sustained chords, kind of elongated sustained notes, but out of all the packs that we have, we can actually do something with the voicing. Like it doesn't have to be only 3 voices, right? So what we can do here, instead of going to add pack, which you can see in a moment, see how no instrument from your first pack got carried over. This is going to be a nightmare if you have a tons of instruments in your current pack and you have to manually add them to the new pack. So what we can do here is basically go in here, and then we can just duplicate this pack, and then all the instruments that you pick in this accompanying pack will be duplicated, and then you change the type of the pack. Let's do another sustain accompanying pack, and let's do 4 voices. Ooh, okay, now we have more voices going on, and then so on. You can do the same thing. Oh, I don't want to preview this. This sounds pretty good. I like that. But anyway, I digress. But let's do another duplicate, and let's do 5 voices. All right, more the merrier. So I think that's pretty much it for the chords layer. Let's focus on the piano now. We have this layer called extra layer. You can have 3 of them at max. So let's definitely utilize one of them. Let's pick a pack for the piano. Since the piano is kind of mirroring what the synth pad is doing, so let's stick to the sustain chord accompany pack. And then let's pick an instrument, of course. Keyboard, see cinematic piano, atmospheric piano. Nice. Can also add another one just for diversity's sakes, and then shimmery. All right, there we go. Of course, you can do the same thing that you do here in the chords layer, so you can have like 4 voices, 5 voices, and so on. And next, we can move on to the vocal pad. We will call another extra layer here, and then boom. We have 3 voices, 4 voices, and 5 voices for the chords already. So, let's do 2 voices for the vocal pad, because why not? And for the instrument, here I really want to mention, I really like the solo singers instruments library here. These are all like samples recorded by like real talented singers, and then they all sound pretty good. What makes it even better is that let's just go into Kiera, and then you go to like their different like pronunciation, like articulation, right? And then there's the stereo mix. It has this expressive legato options, because the more expressive the better, the more natural the vocal sounds, right? So I really like that, so let's definitely add that. And we can also add just add more singers in there, get everyone in there singing. Why not, right? Of course, if you want to get 2 of them singing at the same time, you can just double them, doubling instruments. So you can just add doubling instruments. I'm gonna play with the octave here, so I'm gonna set octave -1, add another vocalist in there, let's get Masha in there, and then 2 vocals for liquid DMB. Let's name it that and create and pick that. Now let's add one more pack before we wrap up this layer. I feel like using a pack that plays a fixed number of voices, but in different types of voicing. So the thick sustained chord pack looks like a good fit here. And now the last piece of the puzzle is the chopped sample vocal that we hear at the end of the phrase and also at the beginning of the piece, right? We actually have a layer designed for that, which is the ornament. Let's come from selection. There we go. So we actually have one accompany pack called simple ornaments. As you can see from the rhythmic pattern here, it's like it only plays at the end of a phrase or a section. So it fits perfectly. So let's pick that. Let's get our chopped vocal in there, which is right here. Chopped vocals 1, staccato. All right, there we are. So we got all the instruments. And now how do we translate the production strategies that we talked about into our generation profile? We're talking about a lot of reverb, right? If you just go here, mixing and orchestration. All right, and then you're gonna see these different options. You have gain, delay, reverb, and filter. So let's definitely go for the reverb first. And we want something really spacey, right? I feel like Dreamverb might be, it might be pretty good. Do 60% because we want beautiful and relaxing kind of spacey, not the bathroom wet, overly humid spacey, unless you find bathroom kind of spacey, beautiful, and relaxing. But anyway, we can add a low cut filter here, cut everything under 1000 Hertz so that it doesn't clash with the lower end played by the bass layer. You can add some light delay here too, 4th note on the left and 8th note on the right. And let's do that. All right. And then for bass, same thing, but I don't want to apply reverb on there. Like usually I don't apply reverb on low frequency contents like the bass, because once the lower frequency contents get reverberated, the piece will end up sounding very, very muddy. So you definitely want to avoid that. But it's up to you. But personally, I would not apply reverb on the bass. And then we can also apply mixing orchestration for the drums, but we don't really need reverb and delay on the drum unless you want to go something really, really spacey. You can do the same thing with all the extra layers in the ornaments too. So let's just do that. And also one thing worth mentioning is the fixed orchestration feature. Basically, if you select the fixed orchestration, out of all the instruments you pick for a layer, the track will only play one instrument consistently throughout the entire piece. And that's particularly useful if you want your track to have a distinct, consistent character. In this case, we're looking at the extra one layer, which is for the vocal pad. And if we select fixed orchestration, the track will not feature Kiera in section A and then switch to Masha in section B, but instead have either one of them or the double instruments that we made play throughout the entire track. So, we can play with that. So fixed orchestration for the vocal, that's pretty nice. All right, so now we have all the mixing we have all the reverb and delay applied. So now let's go into the setting tab. So let's go through each one of them. So dynamic range, it basically means how loud you want your piece to be. So I would say, because I want to chill on the sofa and listen to liquid drum and bass, but I don't want to fall asleep to it. So let's do quiet, and then we can have it loud. It's not going to be like loudest, but like the range from quiet to loud is a comfortable range for me. So I'll pick that. And for expressive performance, let's do no tempo variation, because at least from my experience, I rarely hear any varying tempos in any kind of drum and bass music. At least that's not common. So let's stick with no tempo variation. And then for auto mixing, this is actually interesting. So I would usually enable auto mixing because the auto mixing algorithm here in AIVA is actually pretty good. But you can also set different layers, like, set the level for different layers the way you want it to. Right now, I will actually keep the default setting and then we'll circle it back later. And then for tempo range, usually a drum and bass piece usually range from 160 to 180. So let's just stick with that. And for the development setting, so this is interesting. Like the layer priorities, if you look at this is exactly why I want to separate the three instruments: the synth pad, the piano, and the vocal pad. Because during the music generation process, the AIVA music engine will play the layer with the highest priority first, and then introduce more layers as the composition goes. Further to the left, higher the priority, and vice versa. This allows more variation in the arrangement, as we can have a section with just the amen break style drum and the bass, and then have the next section layering the synth pad, the vocal pad, and all the crazy good stuff on top. And then let's say in the outro, take away all those and leave only the drum and the bass to wrap up the track. So if you now look at the minimum number of layers, now it is set to 2. Which means a minimum of 2 layers will always be played. And which 2 will be played is determined by how you set up the priority of each layer. In this case, since the drum and the bass are the soul of drum and bass, right? I want the percussion layer and the bass layer to always be playing. And we can then introduce the chord layer, which is the synth pad, and then next in line will be extra, which is the cinematic piano, and then extra 1, which is the vocal pad. Well, we don't have a melody layer, so we can just ignore that and put that to the very end. Well, some of you might have noticed that we're missing the ornament layer. The reason it is not there is that it behaves differently from other layers. Remember, it's called ornament. It's more of an embellishment that appears here or there than a key layer that defines the character of the track, like the percussion layer, which dictates the overall rhythm, or the chords layer, which dictates the harmony component of the track. Alright, so let's move on to selecting a development type. This basically stands for the structure, the filter envelope, and any form-related musical decisions that will be applied to the compositions generated by this generation profile. You can look in the description for what type you think will best suit your musical style. In my case, I will go for Deep House 2, which is similar to Electronic Song 1 and 2 but more catered to forms you will see in house music. I picked Deep House 2 specifically for the way it uses filters since it gives a smoother filter sweep, and the filter sweep does not occur as frequently as in the electronic song development types. This is definitely something you will eventually get more familiar with once you play around with it more, so don't get overwhelmed. So let's go to harmony. You can go into harmonic dataset, which dictates the kind of harmony that will be played by our layers. We're seeing a bunch of options here, so to help us navigate what suits our musical style the most, we can filter them by styles and genres, or even emotion. And I want to emphasize how important the ability to filter by emotion is, since harmony is what really defines the overall mood and vibe of a track. So for example, this sounds different from this. Right, the former is in major key and the latter is in minor key, and we usually associate the major keys being happy and lighter in mood, and minor keys with being negative and sad. Let's look at another example where we add a 7th note on top of the triad. Now adding that 7th note really makes things kinda jazzy, right? We can even go more ambitious like this. Wow, that's an emotional roller coaster, right? We've gone through so many types of chords and emotions, so you can see how different tonalities and voicing and even density of the chords can change the entire mood of the phrase. And that is why we want the chord progression and the harmony to be simple and not as challenging to the ears as, let's say, jazz. With that in mind, I'll pick Simple Chords 5, which has the simplicity that we need, but also has that extra spice with the 7th chords. And I'll also select the most repetitive for harmonic repetition and slow for harmonic pacing based on the same reason. And that's it. Whew, that took a while, huh? So now grab your headphone because we're about to generate some music based on this generation profile that we just created together. Before that, let's rename our generation profile to something more interesting and lively. Right. Alright now, so go to the top right corner and click Create. Set the key signature and the length of the composition to whatever you like. For now, I'll set auto for key signature and duration and generate. Alright, now our very first track is generated. Let's take a listen in the editor. And the reason that we want to go into the editor is that we can take a look at the levels and the instruments that the music engine picked for each layer one by one. And then we can make changes to the choice of instruments in the generation profile page if we don't like what we hear. Or we can go into auto mixing to set how loud we want each layer to be relative to other layers based on what we just heard. So without further ado, let's hear our track. Alright, we're starting with the kick and the bass. And the aim and break style percussion comes in. Nice. Oh, whoa, that's a little loud here, huh? Okay, what I'm noticing here is the vocal pad is obviously too loud, and the chords layer is a little bit too low. Oh, here, listen to the percussion. The low frequency parts are cut because of the filter envelope. Now the low frequency parts are being reintroduced. That's a nice transition here. And the bass can be a little louder too, because I can hear the bass but not the individual notes. I want to have more clarity in there. And I think we nailed down the reverb, like the spaciness really well. Like it feels atmospheric and spacey to me. Yeah, the bass definitely needs to be louder. Nice, I like how the outro kind of mirrors the intro, right? So like both of them only have the bass and the kick that feels authentic to what a real composer would do in a composition. With that being said, let's adjust some levels. So, oh wow. but the extra one layer, which is the vocal pad, is like boosted to the highest. Oh my god. So let's crank it down to a 10. And that's a bit too low. That feels like a moderate level. Sounds good. And I feel like this can be a little louder too. And the extra layer can be slightly lower, I think. Maybe just by 2 dB. And I would personally love the percussion to have a little bit more kick. And by that, I mean make it more punchy and more in the foreground. Now we feel the punchiness of it. And the bass definitely needs to be louder too. So let's, okay. Now that feels right. Because if you listen to it on a headphone, you can really feel the sub. It's like really hard and boosted. Alright, so now we have all the levels kind of adjusted, and let's reflect that in the auto mixing settings. Earlier I mentioned that we want to deal with the auto mixing later because we can deal with the mixing after we hear what the composition sound like initially, and then we make changes after that. So let's go through it one by one. So for the first extra layer, that will be the atmospheric piano. I think we can do like a -2 dB. And for the bass, I feel like we can make a, just make it extra loud, just make it punchier. So let's do like a 8 dB maybe, or 9 dB according to what we did earlier. And then extra one, which is the very, very, very loud vocal pad. That's do like a more drastic decrease in the levels. And then for the chords layer, I like it a little louder, so maybe like 1 dB or 2 dB. 2 dB will be nice. And then for the percussion, let's do like a 3 dB. All right, so let's save that. We want to choose mix and normalize because that will utilize the auto mixing algorithm of the AIVA engine, which saves me the trouble from mixing the stuff on my own. All right, let's hear it. All right, I'm already feeling the punch here with the kick and the bass. I like the levels now with a vocal pad. Let me skip ahead. Wow, I'm amazed by how rich and saturated the sub sounds in this one. Like, it really exceeds my expectation here. And like the overall reverb and the overall ambience in this track. We really reached the level of reverb and the level of spaciness in the reference track. Alright, there we go. I think that's about it. In this case, we didn't have any problem with the instruments that we picked, which is really nice, but we adjusted the level and then we reflect that in the auto mixing so that the AIVA music engine will mix the stuff for us according to what we hear and according to how we want to adjust it. Also, an important note is that you also need to modify the auto mixing settings in the generation profile interface, not just in the editor. And the reason for doing this in the editor in the piano roll is to test the new values with context to the music. And to confirm the new values, we need to add them back to our generation profile for these changes to be used in future compositions generated by the generation profile. So that's it. Here's how you can create a generation profile from scratch. I hope you find this tutorial enjoyable and helpful. And if you have any questions or interesting observations and experiences using generation profile, feel free to leave a comment and share your thought or join our community on Discord by clicking the link in the description. I'm Howard, Music Supervisor here at AIVA, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.